So, to kick off our final season of Forum, is the one and only Shelly Oria. I'm so thrilled to be able to welcome her here as my longtime colleague and friend and amazing writer. And introducing her are the equally wonderful Emily Ringel and Hope Hoffman. Come on down and give them a big hand.
I'm not sure.
Was it not working? I don't think so.
Is it on?
Here,
is the thing on?
I'm going to go up here.
Safe into it.
Here.
So what's that? Can you turn the volume on?
This is the volume here. Okay. It should pop. What happens when you pop? Test.
Is it working?
No.
No. Okay.
It's like a loose connection or something.
Turn up the volume.
We can all project.
Yeah, so you probably can't project.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, maybe just get a little closer.
Maybe I have to stand here and hold this.
Go ahead.
Can everyone, can you guys hear me? Like way back there?
Maybe you just have to really lean into it.
Yeah. Okay.
Lean in.
Can you reach it? Okay. It is true that in New York, when you wash your clothes, the water turns gray. You scrub, and inside the bubbles, you see soot. But I don't mind it. I know that this urban dirt is the side effect of speed and productivity. I think New York 1, Tel Aviv 0. So says the narrator of the title piece in Shelly Oria's first book, New York 1, Tel Aviv 0, a collection of masterfully crafted, confident, and vulnerable stories that follow characters grappling with the experience of being two things at once: Israeli and American, insider and outsider, gay and straight, content and conflicted. The complication lies in that they are simultaneously both, as our classmate Amanda Hoffman said, but also neither. This constantly warring identity leads to multifaceted and complex stories with characters that share our fears and disappointments about belonging. They exist in dentist office, fitting rooms, East Village brunch spots, sunlit apartments, Keith Buckley readings, and office parks that look like Disneyland. Shelley's profound understanding of her characters' desires, motivations, and fears allow her to manipulate points of view seamlessly to create not only characters, but dimensional and malleable human beings that the reader understands. Whether good or bad, they are wholly real.
Like her characters, Shelley has also experienced this duality of identity. After growing up in Israel, she returned to the United States in her 20s to pursue an MFA at Sarah Lawrence College. After first translating her works from Hebrew to English, she discovered that her identities had different voices and taught herself to write in English. Her fiction has appeared in the Paris Review, McSweeney's, Tri-Quarterly, 5 Chapters, Electric Lit's Recommended Reading, Quarterly West, and others. Her collection, New York 1, Tel Aviv 0, was released by FSG and Random House Canada in November of 2014. Shelley curates the series Suite, Actors Reading Writers, has a private practice as a creativity coach, and teaches here at Craft, where until this semester she co-directed Writers Forum. Please help us welcome Shelly Oria.
Form are always like, that was the best introduction anyone had ever. And I mean, they don't say it in that voice. And I'm sure they actually mean it, but it's like we hear it every time, and it's always like, yeah, that's. And now I was feeling it. So that is for sure the best introduction I've ever had. That's why people always say it. I don't even get water. It's a good thing I got my special treatment.
Sorry.
I love you. It's good to be here. I feel like I haven't been here in about 17 years, which is ridiculous because I've not been here in about not even 2 months, but it really does feel like approximately 17 years. So I'm very excited to be back after 17 years. There's so many faces I don't know, which is also exciting. So can you not hear me?
Totally hear you.
We're just messing up that baby. Yeah, and then the first row. Is that okay? Better. So I was thinking for today, I mean, I've been reading from the book for a few months now, but for Pratt, I wanted to choose, which is something I've been trying to do recently just in general, choose, like challenge myself and choose, because you know how readings are their own unique thing. Like it's not just about the writing, it's about what translates in a public forum, and a reading I think is sort of this tricky format. So I have been trying to challenge myself and find new sections from the book that I haven't read yet and see what works. So we're going to test something entirely new today. It's one of my sort of personal favorites, even though that's maybe an awful thing to say. One of my children is preferable to me than the others. And it's not, but it's special to me in some way. And in part because it's one of the only 2 stories out of the 18 in the book that's written in third close. And one of the only ones I've ever written in third. It's sort of not at all my go-to point of view and doesn't come very easily. And I don't know how it reads, but we're going to find out together. I'm just going to read the first few pages, and then we're going to do our Q&A, which many of you know what that's about, and those of you who don't, it's a Q&A. So start thinking about, all right, I'm seeing other faces of people who possibly don't have to be here. Can you raise your hand for a second if you're here for me and you don't have to be here? 1, 2 people. That is awesome. Thank you to those 2 people and to all of you. All right. So I'm going to read just the first few pages of Phonetic Masterpieces of Absurdity. Sometimes, after the men leave, Nadine's body tells her to wait a while for the water. Make that bath count more. She lies still, and her skin feels too tight on her bones, like someone gave her the wrong size. With a finger that smells of them, she looks for sharpness where she knows she will find it. Elbows, knees, shoulder blades. The edges of her bones comfort her, but it's a feeling that passes quickly, and soon there is need for more, for proof. So Nadine gently touches her cheek with her knuckles. Her knuckles are her secret weapon. She thinks these knuckles could make a peach bleed. She should probably charge more by now, but she can never figure out what to say or how to say it. The men smell of baby carrots because their 5-year-old son mistakes baby carrots for candy, and of sweat because they're always nervous when they see her, even if they've been coming for years. Or they smell of ice cream because last night their wife tried to revive the marriage with some innovative foreplay, and have Viagra breath because they stopped trusting their body long before it failed them. It doesn't matter. Thursdays are the busiest. She never understood why. On Wednesdays, her BlackBerry keeps buzzing with men's anticipation until she feels like there are bees inside her ears. So on Wednesdays, saying no is important. I miss you too, baby. Really wish I could. Every man is baby, no exception. That she learned early on. Even the sophisticated ones appreciate the gesture, the implicit warmth, the promise of anonymity. But she does know their names, of course, sometimes even their last name, and on a few occasions the name of a wife, a mother, a sister they haven't spoken to in 6 years. It pains them that the sister won't return their calls. They ask, why won't she fucking let it go already? Nadine doesn't want to look for answers. If they insist on talking, she touches their hair, lets her eyes roll up and down their torso. She waits for their body to remember what it wants. Really, she waits for the chatter to stop, but the trick is still giving it the space it needs. Once, when it was absolutely necessary, she made tea. Generally speaking, she remembers more than she should. The bump on the back of their neck, the sweat behind their ear right before they come, the scar on the toe of their left foot, and the story behind it. There's always a story behind it. They tell the stories and then retell them. Because, well, if she doesn't truly exist, surely she doesn't remember. They desperately need to believe that she isn't real. Thank you. What is that? Blah, blah, blah. Although we want to mind that, there's always a story behind it. They tell the stories and then retell them. Because, well, if she doesn't truly exist, surely she doesn't remember. They desperately need to believe that she isn't real. But then there are times when she can see sadness in their eyebrows, in their lower back, and suddenly they want her to remember. Temporarily, they acknowledge her presence in the world. It's funny, but you're the most stable thing in my life, you know? That's my man voice. In these moments, she has learned, a nod goes a long way. The woman, the photographer, Mia, has been dominating her thoughts. Now Nadine even dreams of her. Last night, Mia was elected world president. Nadine wants to know things like what's Mia's favorite fruit, what she looks like when she cries. Mia. She rolls Mia's name on her tongue until she sounds like a cat. Mia wants to know her too. The first thing she said was, "I'd like to get to know you if you'd let me." But Mia wants to know her the way a painter wants to know her canvas. Besides, there's always a lens between them. Mia reached her through a friend of a friend of a friend, someone Nadine hadn't talked to in years. On the phone, Mia sounded aggressive, and Nadine wanted to say, "Sorry, I don't think I'm interested." But for a few minutes, she chewed the words like she chews her gum before falling asleep, unable to spit. Finally, she said, "Okay." She said it softly, and Mia didn't hear her, so she had to repeat, "Okay." Nadine assumed they would meet at some bar or cafe. "I work on the Lower East Side," she told Mia, "plenty of places to choose from." But Mia said it would be helpful for the project, if she could see Nadine's apartment. She may have used the words natural environment, as in seeing you in your natural environment. Nadine cleaned her natural environment, even though it was already clean. She bought a new plant for the spot between the TV and the sofa that always looked naked. She made cupcakes, but also got cheese and wine because she wasn't sure what the occasion called for. And all the while, she was asking herself why she cared so much. People never want to come all the way up to Washington Heights, and there weren't many people in her life these days anyway, so maybe that's all it was. She wasn't used to hosting. But then, in the shower, where her thoughts are always honest, a different answer came. It was the word the photographer kept using, interview. As in, last week, Madonna sat down with us for an interview. Or, in a recent interview, the Secretary of State expressed her concern. "I'm conducting interviews with a few women, pretty long, thorough interviews," the photographer said in an accent Nadine couldn't quite place, the words going fast and their ends hard. "And then, hopefully I'll find the best fit for the project, and hopefully she'll want to go ahead and work together." She laughed what must have been a nervous laugh, but it didn't sound nervous, and Nadine would later learn that nothing Mia did appeared nervous. If the photographer chose her, Nadine would be photographed, and then, if all goes well, Nadine wasn't quite sure what that meant, the photographs would be on display at some gallery for the world to see. In the shower, Nadine imagined an old Jewish couple, a young babysitter, a professor at Columbia. They were all at the gallery looking at Nadine's body in the pictures, and even though Nadine had never met them, they now possessed an intimate knowledge of her, because that's what photographs do, isn't it? Reveal. A photograph. Nadine is standing in her small kitchen, waiting for the water to boil. There's a yellow and tired quality to the room. Her back to the camera, Nadine is looking to the side, the left half of her face visible. She's about to make tea for herself and for Mia. Green ceramic cups to Nadine's right, empty and waiting. There's nothing suggestive in the picture, nothing that tells the viewer how Nadine earns a living. What you can see is something like disappointment, and this you can see in Nadine's posture, and if you look closely, in her facial expression. Nadine is disappointed because Mia already has her camera out. All that clicking. How can you talk to someone who just clicks all the time? How can you get to know someone who reaches for the camera every time she feels something? You cannot. There's a brief moment in which this understanding sinks in, and the camera captures it. I'm going to stop here. Thank you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have an awkward silence for about 9 seconds. 7 to 9 seconds. Sometimes 10, but I don't think we need to go that far today. And then the first person is like, very hesitantly, do this. Gina!
I don't usually butt in like this, but how did that feel?
To be back at
Well,
Pratt.
no, to read that
Oh, to
story.
read that
you
story?
haven't read before.
I don't know, how was it for you? I mean, I felt good about it in the sense that, you know, these things are so hard. Generally speaking, I think the only way to really, really know is when you're reading something funny. And that, of course, then sometimes people don't laugh, and that's a whole special kind of experience. But when they do, then you sort of know that they're with you in a way that's sort of concrete and definite, as much as anything in life is. But then when you're reading something that isn't funny, then it's sort of like an energy thing. Like I felt like for the most part people were with me, but who knows? Maybe I'm telling myself that, you know. So it's hard to know, which is why I generally don't choose sections that aren't funny. I'm sort of lucky enough that a lot of things read kind of funny, like things I sort of discover that in doing readings, like things that I don't think are hilarious necessarily, but people respond to them in readings. Not that it's like stand-up comedy, but you know, just like that little giggle that tells you an audience is with you. So usually I would choose these sections. In all honesty, because I have experience doing forum, I know that these people don't laugh. Like it's one thing to do readings at a bar and people just are drinking and they know that it's fine to laugh. I mean, sometimes they don't, even at those places, but most of the time they do. And here I feel like people are incredible and know so much about craft at Pratt and all of that, but I think students tend to feel like this is serious, this is class, and it takes a lot for them to laugh when you're reading to them, like when you're talking at something else. But so I sort of knew that, so I was thinking today on my way over, like, what am I going to read? And I figured, well, it's not going to be, like, better not to go for something funny and then feel weird that people aren't laughing, which I know sometimes can happen. So that's why, that's the full and honest answer of why I chose this section.
That was very relevant also.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to take that silence, starting now. Jake, you're not letting the awkward silence sink in.
Sorry, I had a question before you started reading. You said like you don't prefer to like do the third person or it doesn't come easily. So like, what makes you go down that route in a story, by like any point of view, when you do?
Yeah, it's such a great question that people ask a lot, and I've come up with different answers because I have no idea is the real answer. It just sort of, I usually start stories, I have very little notion of what's going on, and to me that's, you know, obviously there are different artistic processes and they're all wonderful in their own ways. For me, I would be bored if I outlined something, or if I knew even what the ending was, or I mean, on rare occasions I would know what the ending was, but would have no idea how to get there, and that could be interesting enough for me to still be engaged in the work. But generally speaking, I just know nothing. And what I will have is either an image or most often just a line. Like I just have the opening line or a line that I think is the opening line and turns out not to be, but a line that's interesting to me. And for me, I follow voice more than anything. And so it's really, usually that is just, at least in terms of how it's revealed to me, that is how it works. Like I'll have a line, and that line will have a pronoun, and that pronoun is either I, or we, or you, or he or she, you know, and that's kind of how it happens. So that's the most honest answer in terms of how my process works. If we're kind of zooming out a little bit and analyzing it, and we have to, but I'm gonna, I think for me when something is really super raw, for whatever reason, it doesn't have to necessarily mean that it's based on something in my life. Usually my work isn't, or not directly at least, but for some reason there's something in it that makes me feel vulnerable, that's hard to write about, that makes me feel protective. I think third gives me a little bit more distance. And as I said, to me that doesn't happen often. I think I'm interested in like going into that vulnerable place, and usually that's why I do write in first most of the time. And then kind of second or first plural, that kind of thing, are kind of playful and fun and explore their own, in their own unique way, explore like different fictional worlds that I'm also interested in, but first is for sure my go-to point of view. But I do think that third just gives you that little bit of distance. For me it does, that sometimes I need. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sweet.
Cool.
In the short story, The Beginning of a Plan, did anything inspire that, or did it just, like, is it something that you just came up with?
So when I wrote the first so that's a story for those of you who haven't read it. It's a story about a world in which time stops. And it's really, to me, I think to most people who read it, it's mainly a love story, but so that's kind of really what matters most in that story. But that love story does exist and happen in a world in which time stops, and it spans like a couple decades. So it's basically every time the couple gets together and that kind of thing. So that story I wrote a first draft of back when I was at Sarah Lawrence getting my MFA, and this is sort of an example of what I was just saying in response to Jake's question. I was on the train back from Bronxville from Sarah Lawrence, and there's in the story, the main character works as a soaper, so she soaps people for a living. I had no idea, I just had a line, I can't even remember now, I don't think the line made it into the final, but the draft of the story, but there was some kind of line that had the word soaping in it. And I wrote it, and I was like, huh? And then I was like, oh, I guess that's what she does for a living, cool. And then right before I got to, I can't remember if it was like Bronxville, New York, or the other way around, but right before I got to where I was supposed to go, I wrote something about time stop, and I was like, what the hell is that? And that was that. Like, I just had these two things, and that's what was there for that story from the get-go. What was challenging about that work, that story that I workshopped, actually still at Sarah Lawrence, was, most of my work is somehow about connection between humans, like love relationships of different kinds. And obviously that's, like, I knew she was a soaper, and I knew time stop, but really I just got interested in their relationship. So then all of the notes in workshop were like, I don't understand the world though, like it's so interesting, and like how does that work? And so that I kept being like, but can we talk about? But I could see that's the thing that I needed to develop. So I really did a lot of work with that story and just I journal for hours and hours and hours, just figuring out things like what happens to the earth, what happens to animals, what happens to women who are pregnant, like what was that little smile about? We just smiled at each other knowingly, like this was discussed or something. No, I was asking Hope, what? Oh. It's good that you smiled too. I'm sorry I didn't see your smile. I saw Hope's and it looked interesting. Anyway, so no idea now what I was saying, but it was something about the beginning of the plan.
What happened to pregnant women? What happened to
different
animals?
That was incredible. That was like very good listening. You can be a life coach, which I suddenly have a memory of us maybe talking about at some point. Yeah, when you did speak, we briefly talked about that. I already said that. This is the second time I'm saying this to you, so now you should take it seriously. You should become a life coach. So basically that was the hardest work for me with that particular story, is figuring out that world and figuring out what happens in the world when time stops. Like, what does that look like? What does that mean? Again, don't know if I answered. Did that answer the question? You can totally say no.
No, it just
Okay. All right.
So with the little piece that you just read us, I guess what sort of struck me about it was that like it was really polished and clean, but it still had that sort of like confessional intimacy that felt revealing and authentic. And I found in a lot of things that I've read, those two things sort of come at the expense of one another, and like whether or not that's a negotiation that you think about in your work, or if that's
a fascinating question that I've actually never been asked before. That's a really good question. I'm trying to think, because again, with so many things, and you guys know this because you know craft and you're all writers. Now again, I have a moment of wanting to be one of those guests. Are people writers in the room? Like what's now I know. So
well, not everyone actually.
Actually, there's lots of non-writers too.
Actually, especially this semester.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry if that made no sense.
No.
I guess it's just like when
Actually
something's
makes
really
sense.
clean like that,
Well, thank you. So first of all, thank you for the compliment. And I do think it made total sense. It's a really good question. I'm just sort of thinking it through, because what I was going to say, and that's why I started saying, you all know craft, or some of you do. And I think that the honest truth with so many of these things is that my immediate answer, if I'm just being honest, is I have no idea. Like, I know these things, I teach them, I know these things in other people, in published work, in my students' work, like all these things, but in my own process, I really try on honestly. Like, I think it's so important to learn a lot, but then it's also really important once you've kind of, not that there's ever really a mastering one's craft kind of point, but once you reach a certain point, forgetting a lot is important too. At least it has been in my life. And so that's why I feel like a lot of these questions that are craft heavy, when I'm being honest, my immediate answer is like, never considered it. But then sometimes when I really try to think in a real way, then I realize that there is a part of my process that maybe I wasn't totally conscious of, but that was there. And so I would say that the honest answer has never occurred to me, and the deeper answer is actually yes, I do think so, because the reason, and that again goes back to Jake's question, the reason that that my go-to point of view is first is because of that intimacy, both like in making myself raw as a writer, and going to the vulnerable place, and also in connecting with the reader in that particular way. And so I think that I would not be interested in third that didn't try to push that boundary too, and try to do the same thing and create that same intimate space. And in fact, with the one other story that's in third in the book, that's the Disneyland of Albany, and that's from a third close on a man who's in his 40s, who's an artist, who's Israeli, but lives in New York, and is sort of in this process of getting a divorce, basically, kind of just estranged from his wife. And the whole story is like his daughter, who's like 7, who comes to visit, and her visit is the entire story, basically. And so that story also has sort of an interesting history to it that kind of relates to your question, I think. And that's the only story in the collection, the other one, the Disneyland of Albany, is the only story in the collection that was originally written in Hebrew, that I originally wrote in Hebrew, and then years and years ago, back when I was still writing in Hebrew, and then translated it. And that too is one of the ones that I was already working on when I was in school, in grad school, and so got some feedback, felt horrible about it, about the feedback, thought there's no way to save it, and kind of just abandoned it. Like, I never fully admitted to myself that I did, but I did. I didn't work on it for years. And then when I was actually working on putting the manuscript together, pretty late stages before it going out, like a couple months before it going out on submission, my agent and I were talking about the story that I just read a few pages of to you today, and we were saying, like, my agent was saying, I really want it in there, I think it's one of the stronger ones, but I think it kind of stands out as the only third. It's a little bit weird. Do you have another third that can sort of balance it in some way? And I especially thought, well, I want to do that, and I especially want to find one that is close on a man, just to create that balance even more perfectly. And so that was the story that came to mind first. And I was doing this writing weekend with a good friend of mine on Cape Cod. It was like, the weather was really bad, but it was so beautiful, it's so gorgeous in Cape Cod, especially when the weather is bad. So I just remember this kind of romantic weather, and we were just like writing for 3 days straight, and I just like did so much work. I kept working on it for a few more months, but I did so much work with that story over that weekend. And what I did, and that's where I connect to your question, is really sort of rewrite the voice entirely, which of course has to do with the fact that this story was originally written in Hebrew, but also it relates to exactly what we're talking about. Like, that sense of intimacy is, I think, what was missing from that older draft, and that's what I worked on, and that's predominantly what I think. I mean, I did a lot of structural work on that story, but I think predominantly what saved it and made it make it to the book was finding like the way to do that in third, like connect and have that intimacy. That was a long answer. Any other?
I mean, maybe this is a really personal question, but do you find that you operate as a writer differently in Hebrew than you do in English? I'm sure you get that a lot.
That is so personal, Amanda.
Language is really personal. I'm just saying.
I was like, what is she gonna ask? Yes, definitely. I mean, my voice just changed entirely when I started writing in English for the first time. And I was so bad at first that was kind of the saving grace. Because there was really, not just saying that to be modest or whatever, like I really sucked. I mean, you know, if anyone here maybe even writes, but definitely if you have a second language that you're fluent in, try writing fiction in that language. In all, you know, likelihood, you're not going to be very good at first. But the thing is, I was in grad school with a lot of people who were really great. So that time did not feel good to my gentle ego. But so, and now I have no idea where I was going with this. My ego is gentle. That's the adjective that's what came up right now, so I was going to go with it. It just feels like ego, when we're talking about it in terms of size, it's always judgmental. Like, is it small? Is it big? Is it, you know? Yeah. So I don't know that mine is big, but I know it needs to be handled with care. And it was not at that time. So I totally forgot that we're filming all of this. Great. Why am I talking about this? What was the question, Amanda?
Writing in Hebrew.
So the point is, I was so bad, but I could see that I was also just very different. And that's why that was the saving grace, or that was the thing that gave me hope. Because I was like, oh, there's this whole new voice. So who knows? If I keep working really hard, maybe one day I'll get better, and then this will be really interesting because this is different. I've been writing since I was 10 years old. And at this point, the time that I'm talking about, I'm like 27. So I've had like a good 17 years of like a lot of writing. And so it was this interesting experience where suddenly it's this whole, I'm writing new things, I'm writing in this new voice, everything feels really different. And then the other part of that answer, and the honest part, is I don't know now. Like, my hope is to eventually write both in English and in Hebrew and have this sort of fluency and versatility and like easily go back and forth. And in the same way, like I used to write plays a lot, and I have the same hope with going back and forth between writing for theater and writing fiction. I've not been able to do any of those things. Like, for me, writing in my second language has taken so much that I've had to sort of really focus on that since I started doing it. So far, I've not been doing that, which means I kind of have abandoned writing in Hebrew. I mean, it's still, obviously, like, it's my first language. Writing an email or a text message will always be easier for me in Hebrew, like that sort of thing. But as far as my actual work, it seems so strange now to think about writing in Hebrew, and I haven't done it in years, so I'm not sure.
Well, considering the fact that you just said at the end that you're not so much writing in Hebrew anymore, my question was, does the language that you start the story in, do you think it not only affects like the voice, the way that it's written, but also the type of character that you end up writing?
Yeah. Interestingly, I think, or it's interesting to me at least, I think that back when I was writing in Hebrew, it's sort of like this thing when you grow up in Israel. Most people you know, almost everyone you know is Israeli. Most people you know are Jewish, and you sort of take that for granted. Which I know, especially for people in this country who are Jewish, that is a bizarre experience. When I share that with them, it strikes them as so strange. And so I think because of that, and that's really just privilege, right? I mean, it's always when you're privileged, you're very often just not aware of your own privilege. There's a transparency. And I think for that reason, back when I was living in Israel and writing in Hebrew, many of my characters weren't necessarily Israeli, because it was just like, what else would they be? Like, you didn't have to identify it in any way. And I think so many of the characters that I write now, not all of them, but like a good number of them are Israeli or Israeli American in this way, because I think it's been just a much bigger part of my own kind of life and my internal conversation and external conversations and all of that for the last 11 years since I moved here.
But I was also thinking like the cultural differences, like the little things within personalities.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you were to write in Hebrew, let's say now being back in the States for a while, do you think that would change, like a little, like I think of a lot of personalities and the differences in the way women talk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the honest answer is I have no idea, because I haven't done it. And as I was saying, I hope to do it one day and find out, but I bet the answer is yes, just because I have changed so much in that time, and I see Israelis differently now. Like, a lot of things that are in my work just as sort of perceptions and things that I notice, like, just even when I say a lot how Israelis are kind of aggressive, and I didn't used to see that or think that. Like, again, when that's just what you know, you don't expect anyone to smile at you just because your eyes lock. Like, why do they have to smile? No one does that, so you don't consider it rude. I mean, it's not technically rude if we think of a cultural context. So over there, it's not considered rude. So that kind of thing. And once I moved, or after a while, I see these things when I go home, it strikes me as so rude. I mean, for about 48 hours, and then I stop smiling and hold the door for people, and I'm back home, and it's fine. But it always, I do have those 48 hours of being like, people here are so aggressive and are in my space and so rude. And then I come back to New York, which is funny in the context of American culture, you know, New York. So I come home and I'm like, aw, they're so sweet. And they really are. Go to Tel Aviv if you ever want to appreciate New Yorkers. Go to Israel. So once again, this is being filmed, like trashing my homeland. So yeah, I don't know. Did that answer? I feel like I didn't fully answer. Yeah. Okay. That's it.
We could have one more if there is one more. Yes.
So you kind of already touched on this, I think, but I was just thinking, like, thematically, like, the stories all have something that, like, links them together. And a lot of times it's, like, a lot of things that link them together. And you've been, like, a lot of these stories have existed, like, in the world for a couple of years, like, even in magazines and stuff. Like, do you write towards, like, this collection, or, like, did you sort of just, like, feel that they all agree with each other and kind of could live together?
Did we ever talk about this?
Maybe.
I feel like I was like, is this, you're just serving me this question, but I feel like,
well, now it's selfish because I'm like trying to do the same thing, so.
So the answer is kind of yes to both. I think at this point in your lives, like what I would like to give to you is as much freedom as I can, and which is why I think don't worry about that at all. Like, don't worry about theme, don't worry about how do these stories fit together, like just do your thing. And that is absolutely what I was doing. Then at some point you start thinking about either getting an agent or putting a manuscript together, sending a manuscript out, possibly for you guys this could be, you know, senior year, maybe you're even thinking about that just for thesis. At those sort of turning points, then you worry about it. But as much as you can, I think sort of divorcing these two, like separate, keeping these two parts of your brain separate. The second one being kind of the editor. When we need the editor, then he or she's always going to be there for us. Like that part of the brain that says like, these don't go together, and you know, this is maybe why, or this is what I think, and this is what I've learned craft-wise, and all of that. We have that part of the brain. That's always, that can be summoned. What I think the harder part is actually releasing it. And the harder part is just letting the creativity and be what it wants to be, and letting, you know, the work go where it's going to go. And so for me, for a long time, I felt like that's never going to be a book because I'm writing all these different points of view. Some of them are about Israel in some way or involve Israeli characters, some don't. There's like all these different things. It's never going to fit. And then when I signed with my agent, and this is already a good few years ago, he was like, his pitch became, okay, this book is where nationality meets sexuality. And that sounded kind of cool and sexy and kind of rude. So I was like, cool, yeah, it's totally a collection, and it's where nationality meets sexuality. Great. And then what the problem became, because I signed with my agent, like I had, thank you. I had like maybe half, not even, half the collection, half the book, and so there was still a lot of work that I had to do past this point of, so then I became a little bit obsessed with, like I knew that this was the pitch, so then I started really worrying about every story, like does it fit that? Like is that nationality means sexuality? Does it have sexuality? Does it have nationality? Do they meet? You know, and that's like not a voice that you want to have in your head at all when you're writing. And so I really, in that part of the work, it really became so much about releasing, like the thing I was talking about earlier, like just trusting that editor voice can come in later in my own brain and also in the form of my agent and later an editor. And so really the work was just like to release that, to write what I needed to write and not worry about that. And then at the end, when we were actually getting ready to send the story out, it did change. And we were talking about it and kind of ordering the collection with that in mind too. We were talking about it then in terms of that that the element that kind of puts it all together is the fluidity of three elements, which is nationality, sexuality, and reality. Because a lot of the stories also like we were talking about the beginning of a plan, so the one that is the time stop, and there are other ones too that sort of exist in somewhat dystopian or whatever landscapes, just non-realist landscapes. And so then the pitch changed to kind of fit the work, which is what I think ideally should happen rather than the other way around. And then I did kind of do the last editing with that in mind. Like, as I said, we ordered the collection very much with that in mind, like to kind of create a wave motion, and as far as these three elements, but I also did a last round of editing with that in mind to kind of see if I can tweak, like, how are these three elements and the fluidity they're in present in each one of these stories, and how can I strengthen the different ones.